He blocked her number for 6 years, then called the day his world fell apart. She was the mother he abandoned. Now she holds the silence he can't escape. What if the person who raised you is the one you betrayed most? And what if your second chance comes with a reckoning? This time she won't fix him. She'll finally choose herself. He vanished with silence. Now he's back with regret. She gave him life. He gave her distance. But when his empire crumbled, he came crawling home. What he didn't expect? Her silence was no longer weakness. It was power. This isn't a reunion. It's a reckoning. The wind slid in low from the bay, a cold breath against the window pane. Eleanor Whitlow sat at her small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, the steam rising like ghosts in morning light. Beyond the glass, the fog moved slow and thick, rolling over the dunes like sleepwalking memories. She didn't mind mornings like these. Silence was a friend that didn't ask questions. The clock on the wall ticked, persistent and dull. Eleanor stared out toward the sea, not expecting anything, not waiting. That had been the secret to peace she'd learned. Stop expecting, stop waiting, and the heart wouldn't bruise so easily. She wore solitude like a housecoat. Soft, worn, protective. Then her phone buzzed. Not a message, not a weather alert, a call. Eleanor looked at the screen. Just a number, no name, no image. But the area code, it rooted her still. A Quetzaltizen Harmatic Los Angeles. Her breath caught without permission. There were few people who would call her from that city. Fewer still who hadn't already erased her from their lives. She let the call ring. 3, 4, 5 times. Her thumb hovered near the screen but never touched. Then silence. The voicemail icon blinked once, quiet and damning. Eleanor set the phone down as if it burned her fingers. She stood and walked to the sink, running water just to hear something predictable. Her hands moved on muscle memory, rinsing the mug, drying it with a cloth older than her regrets. Her mind, however, spun backwards like a reel tearing from its spool. Griffin, it had to be. 6 years ago, the last words had come not from a phone, but from a slammed door. "I can't be around you anymore," he'd said. "You made everything worse." Her son, her only child. He hadn't called since. Eleanor pressed her palms to the countertop, trying to will herself back to the stillness she'd curated. Her therapist had warned her, grief never fully packs up and leaves. It hides in the attic, waiting, and when the floor creaks, when the lights flicker, there it is again, dragging its trunk down the stairs. She sat back down and stared at the phone. Not listening to the voicemail was an act of self-defense. It wasn't just a message. It was a key, and she wasn't sure if it would open a door or a wound. Some things you bury for your own survival, and some things you bury because no one else offers to help carry the body. 6 years of no birthdays, no holidays, no apologies, and now one voicemail. She touched the screen again just to feel its silence, then turned the phone over. Let it sleep. Let the message wait. Let the past stay where it belonged, for now. Eleanor's voice came back to her, quieter than before, not spoken but internal, as if her mind had grown used to whispering. A mother isn't a lifeboat, not always. Sometimes she's the one who's drowning, and no one asks if she wants to be saved. She rose and walked toward the living room. The fog outside had thickened. The phone stayed on the table. Her silence was deliberate. It wasn't revenge. It was survival. The fog had settled heavier now, cloaking the shore like it knew what Eleanor was remembering. She stood in the hallway just off the kitchen, where the walls bore the remnants of a life too heavy to carry, but too rooted to remove. She ran her hand along the trim of a photo frame, its glass dusty but intact. Inside, an old family portrait. Her, Caleb, and Griffin, taken one summer when smiles were expected, not earned. The memory came in like a tide. It was always like that with Caleb. Control wasn't loud, not always. It was in the withheld glances, the stifled sighs, the way he corrected her stories before she finished telling them. "That's not how it happened, Elle." He'd say, jaw tight, voice even. "Don't exaggerate." Eleanor had learned early not to raise her voice, not to contradict, not to need. The house wasn't loud, it was brittle. Every word was measured, weighed, and filed for future judgment. Griffin had grown up in the same quiet storm. He wasn't hit, he wasn't neglected, but he was shaped. Shaped by the chill in his father's tone, the calculated critiques masked as fatherly guidance. You want to play the piano, son? You need discipline. Your mother never followed through on anything. You're too soft, Griffin, just like her. Eleanor had stood by the doorway too many times, listening, her own protests caught in her throat. She'd believed it too, that softness was weakness, that her role was to keep the peace, to shrink when the temperature in the room rose. So she did. She softened herself out of relevance. When Griffin was small, he used to crawl into her lap and touch her face like he was memorizing her. He'd cry when she left the room, hug her legs when she returned. She held him like he was her only anchor to the world. But as he grew, the distance did too. And it was subtle, just enough that she couldn't call it out without sounding hysterical. He'd laugh at her absent-mindedness, roll his eyes when she mixed up dates, parrot back Caleb's corrections with a teenage sneer. The worst part was knowing she'd let it happen, that she'd allowed Caleb's version of her to be the only one Griffin saw. By the time Griffin was in high school, dinners were tight-lipped routines. Caleb spoke about stocks and politics. Griffin copied his cadences. Eleanor served quietly, cleaning up plates before her own was half finished. Then came college. Griffin had gotten into a school in California, far from their Virginia home. Eleanor had cried in the laundry room when the acceptance letter came, not from pride, from fear. Their final argument had been in the driveway. A suitcase lay open in the trunk. Eleanor had reached out to adjust Griffin's collar instinctively, and he'd flinched. "Don't," he said. She stepped back, hand shaking. "Griffin, I just wanted to what?" he snapped. "Smother me one more time before I go?" The words hit like a slap. She blinked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I only ever tried to protect you." "Protect me? From what? From Dad? Or from you screwing everything up like you always do?" He didn't look back as he got in the car. Eleanor had watched the taillights until they vanished. "I lost him twice," she whispered now, standing before the photo in the hallway. Once to his father and once to himself. She hadn't taken that picture down in all these years, not because it brought her joy, but because it reminded her of who she used to be. A mirror held too long becomes a mask. She took the frame down carefully and brought it to the kitchen. The table still held her untouched phone, screen dark. She set the frame down and turned it over. The cardboard backing was loose. As she pulled it away, something slipped out. Folded paper, small, aged, a note. Her heart stilled. The handwriting was unmistakable. Griffin's. It was scribbled in pencil, uneven, like it had been written in secret. "I wish things were different, Mom. I do. I just don't know how to fix it." The words bled into her like thawed ice. She sat down slowly, fingers trembling not from age, but from rupture. He had written this. He had once tried to say what he couldn't speak aloud, but he never gave it to her. Maybe he didn't know how. Maybe he was still learning. Eleanor placed the note beside the frame. She stared at it, her breath shallow. For a long time she didn't move. Just listened, to the waves breaking far off, to the house settling, to her own heartbeat, stubborn and still here. She wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. But something inside her shifted, not softened, just shifted. Maybe the silence didn't need to be an end. Maybe it was just a space. And in that space, for the first time in years, she let herself remember the little boy who used to reach for her hand without shame. The porch light had been on since dusk, swaying gently in the coastal wind like a beacon that refused to give up. It cast a cone of golden light across the old boards, illuminating the fine grains of salt that blew in with the evening tide. Eleanor stood just beyond it, holding a mason jar of sweet tea gone lukewarm, her other hand curled tight in her sweater pocket. Across the way, Margot Ellis stepped out onto her own porch, wrapped in a knitted shawl the color of old plum. She raised a hand in greeting, then shuffled down her steps with the steady command of someone who never asked for permission, just made her way. "You've been standing out here for a good half hour." Margot said as she reached Eleanor's porch. You keeping watch for ghosts or trying to avoid the ones inside? Eleanor managed a weak smile but didn't respond right away. Margot took the seat beside her, settling with a sigh that suggested she'd done this many times, for herself and others. Was it him? She asked finally. The call. Eleanor didn't answer, not with words, she just nodded. Margot looked out at the darkened street. You gonna listen to it? I haven't yet, Eleanor said. Her voice was small but steady. I don't know if I want to. Margot turned to her, eyes sharp but kind. You're not obligated to open every door just because someone knocks. I know, Eleanor whispered. The porch light creaked above them. I think I'm afraid, she admitted after a moment. Margot folded her arms. Afraid of what? That I'll want to help him, that I'll lose everything I worked to build just to try again. Margot nodded slowly. You rebuilt a whole life, Eleanor, piece by piece. Don't discount that just because someone else is finally reaching back. The wind picked up, brushing Eleanor's hair across her cheek. She tucked it behind her ear and stared into the night. Silence sat between them for a while, but it wasn't heavy. It was something else, something that felt like mutual understanding. Inside the house, her journal lay open on the dining table. She had left it that way intentionally, pages fluttering slightly under the ceiling fan. The entries were a breadcrumb trail of survival, of slow, deliberate healing, 6 years of ink-stained grief and resolve. Notes scribbled at midnight, lists of things that brought her peace, tea with cardamom, her walks along the shore, the smell of pine after rain. Pages where she admitted for the first time that she didn't miss who Griffin had become, but missed who he used to be, missed who he could have been. I wrote it all down, Eleanor said quietly. Every feeling I wasn't allowed to feel when I was his mother. Every word I couldn't say to Caleb. Margot looked at her, eyes gentle now. And do you feel like you're ready to say any of them to him? Eleanor shook her head. Not yet. Then don't, Margot replied. You don't owe anyone the pieces you bled to grow. Eleanor exhaled slowly. She didn't cry. She hadn't in a while. But the ache in her chest felt like something close to it. She looked up at the porch light. The bulb flickered once, then held steady. I don't want to lose myself again, she said. Then don't, Margot said. This time, you're allowed to be the one worth saving. The house was still, save for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of old wood contracting in the night air. The moonlight stretched across the kitchen floor in long slats, silver and sharp, brushing over Eleanor's bare feet as she stood at the edge of the table. Her phone sat in the center, black screen, unread message, unspoken truths. It had been 3 days since the call, 3 nights of half sleep, of dreams where Griffin was 10 again, asking her to sing to him when he couldn't fall asleep, dreams that always ended with a door slamming. She didn't light the overhead. Instead, she moved in the quiet, fingers brushing across the table as if expecting to feel the weight of the past. She picked up the phone. One new voicemail. She pressed play. His voice hit like a cold current. Mom, I didn't know who else to call. A beat. The shuffle of movement. His breath caught, like he'd just stopped himself from saying something else. My business, it's gone under. Everything. I made mistakes. I trusted the wrong people. Or maybe I was the wrong person, I don't know. He laughed once, a hollow, short sound. I'm staying at a friend's. I didn't know if this was still your number. No apology, not even a hint of it. Just the sound of a man on the edge, clawing for something that once held him. If you can call me back, I'd appreciate it. Click. Eleanor stood still, the silence in the room pressing against her ears. It was not just a message, it was a haunting. A ripple from a stone cast years ago, finally reaching her shore. She lowered the phone. Her eyes didn't water, but her jaw clenched until her teeth ached. She turned toward the window, where the moon hovered just above the bay, distant and pale. The image pulled her backwards to another night. 6 years ago, Griffin on the porch, duffel slung over his shoulder, his mouth curled with contempt. You ruined everything. She remembered how her hands had trembled, how the porch light buzzed above them, how she'd tried to say something, anything, but the words died before they formed. He hadn't just left, he'd exiled her. And now here he was, clawing his way back, but only because the house he'd built was in ashes. Eleanor sat down slowly, hands gripping the edge of the table. Her mind was a tangle, anger braided with guilt, love stitched to betrayal. Her motherly instinct screamed for her to reach out, to fix, to shelter, but she wasn't that woman anymore. She couldn't be. She had spent 6 years learning not to bleed for someone who wouldn't even hand her a bandage. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text. "Margot, can we talk for a moment?" Eleanor frowned, typing back a brief reply. A minute later, Margot was at the door, wrapped in her shawl, her face shadowed by concern. "I didn't want to bring this up before," Margot began as Eleanor poured them both a bit of whiskey into chipped glasses. "But I think you should know." Eleanor sat, glass untouched. "What is it?" Margot exhaled slowly. "Griffin called me, about 2 weeks ago." Eleanor's heart paused. "What?" "He said he was looking for you. Didn't know where you lived anymore. I didn't give him anything. I told him if he wanted to talk to you, he needed to call you himself." Eleanor stared at her. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because you deserved peace, and I didn't know if hearing from him would give you any. I wasn't sure he'd even try." The betrayal wasn't deep. It was mild, filtered through the knowledge that Margot had tried to protect her. Still, it left a residue. So all of this, it wasn't spontaneous. He was laying groundwork. Margot nodded. Eleanor leaned back, letting the revelation settle. It wasn't just desperation. It was calculation. Not malevolent, perhaps, but familiar. And familiar was dangerous. She rose and stood by the window again, watching the night ripple. She imagined Griffin in some stranger's guest room, staring at the same kind of moon, wondering if she'd respond. But silence was not absence. It was its own kind of language. For now, she wasn't ready to speak his. The office hadn't changed much in the years Eleanor had been away. Same soft light from the frosted windows, same pale blue walls textured with calm. A few new framed prints dotted the room, modern art, all curves and suggestion, but the bones were still familiar. The space felt like it was built to hold the weight of things people didn't want to say. Dr. Celia Rowe sat across from Eleanor in her usual place, legs crossed, notepad untouched, her presence more watchful than clinical. She had a way of listening that made silence feel like an invitation rather than an absence. In her mid-40s, Celia had the kind of stillness that came from years of learning when not to interrupt. Eleanor sat back on the couch, hands folded tightly in her lap. It had taken her 3 days to make the appointment and another 2 to actually show up. "So," Celia began gently, "he called." Eleanor nodded. "Left a voicemail. I played it." "And?" "It was vague," Eleanor said, her voice thin. "His business collapsed. He said he didn't know who else to call." Celia's brow arched slightly, not unkindly. "Did he apologize?" Eleanor met her eyes. "No." "Did he ask how you were?" A pause. "No." Celia didn't say anything right away. She let the moment stretch, as if laying a quiet path Eleanor could follow. "Do you want to call him back?" she asked eventually. Eleanor sighed, a sound that came from a place below breath. "I don't know. Part of me does. Part of me is terrified." "Terrified of what?" "Of losing myself again, of forgetting what it cost me to get here." Celia leaned forward slightly. "Eleanor, you're not obligated to mother someone who only calls you mom when it benefits him." The words landed like a stone dropped in water, not sharp, but heavy. Eleanor looked down at her hands. They didn't tremble anymore, not the way they used to. There had been a time she'd clenched them so tightly, her knuckles would whiten at the sound of her name spoken in anger. "I spent so many years believing I was only worth what I gave," she said softly. "If I wasn't needed, I wasn't wanted." "That's not unusual," Celia replied, "especially for women raised to disappear behind the word mother." Eleanor looked out the window, a few brown leaves twisted in the wind, reluctant to let go. I thought if I gave Griffin everything, if I bent myself into whatever shape he needed, he'd love me for it, she said. But all I taught him was how to take. Celia nodded. And now, I don't know how to be his mother without breaking again. Maybe you don't need to be, Celia offered. Maybe you just need to be Eleanor, a woman who survived, who rebuilt, who gets to choose who gets access to her. The session continued, peeling back layers Eleanor thought she'd already discarded. But they weren't wounds anymore. They were scar tissue. Tender, yes, but whole. Later that afternoon, Eleanor returned home and moved through her house like someone navigating the past with intention. In the attic, she pulled down an old plastic bin and set it on the living room floor. Inside, Griffin's childhood existed in pieces. Crayon drawings of dragons and knights, a Mother's Day card made of construction paper and glue, a clay ashtray from second grade, long before either of them knew she didn't smoke. She sat cross-legged on the floor, the house hushed around her. The light outside shifted into gold as the afternoon deepened. Piece by piece, she pulled the memories out, sorting them like relics. Some she placed gently into a new keepsake box. Others she set aside, not with malice but with clarity. Not everything needed to be preserved. Not everything needed to follow her into the life she was choosing now. She paused at one particular drawing. Griffin, maybe 6 years old, had drawn a woman with giant eyes and a cape. In big block letters it read, "My mom is a hero." Her fingers lingered on the edges. She smiled, sad and full. "I was," she whispered. "I just didn't know it then." She set the drawing in the box to keep. Outside, the light dimmed, but inside, something had shifted. She didn't feel hollowed out by the process. She felt lighter. That night, she sat by the fireplace, a notebook open in her lap, her journal. She didn't write to Griffin. She wrote to herself. "You are not a lifeline. You are a life. You are not a mirror of their need. You are not the echo of someone else's story. You are the voice that stayed, even when no one listened. And that, Eleanor, is enough." Eleanor waited. Let him fill the space with his version of events. "And before that?" she asked. He hesitated. "I made some bad calls." "Business calls? Or personal ones?" His jaw tensed. "Does it matter?" "It does to me." Griffin looked away out the window, watching a couple walk past with a dog in tow. "I didn't come here for a lecture." "Good," she said, "because I'm not offering one." Another pause. The coffee arrived, steaming and strong. Eleanor stirred it slowly, not sipping. "You think I only came back because I need something," Griffin said. "I don't think it," she replied. "You told me." He didn't deny it. She watched him shift in his seat, restless, avoidant. The same boy who once changed the subject when accountability crept too close. "Griffin, what happened to the money from your father's estate?" His eyes snapped to hers. "What do you mean?" "I never touched it," she said calmly. "There were still accounts Caleb kept that I didn't even know existed until after the funeral. I let the lawyers handle everything, but someone's been withdrawing, recently." He looked caught, but only for a second. "I had a right to it," he said, defensive. "You think I haven't suffered enough from everything he left behind?" "I think there's a difference between a right and a theft." He leaned back, eyes narrowing. "You're accusing me of stealing from you now?" "I'm asking a question, one you're not answering." The air between them went colder. The hum of the cafe around them seemed to fade. "I didn't come here to fight," he muttered. "No," Eleanor said, rising. "You came here because your life burned down and I'm the last safe place you could think of." He didn't stop her as she reached for her coat, didn't apologize, didn't plead. She looked at him one last time before walking out. "You haven't lost everything, Griffin. You just lost the ability to pretend." Outside, the sky had gone gray, clouds pressing in low and close. The sea smelled metallic. Eleanor walked steadily toward her car, her hands steady, her pulse even. That night, she sat across from Doctor, row, legs tucked beneath her, notebook on the armrest beside her. "I saw him," she said. Celia nodded, unsurprised. How did it go? He's still good at dodging. Did he tell you everything? Number, but he didn't have to. Eleanor reached into her bag and pulled out a legal envelope. I spoke to my attorney after the meeting. He confirmed it. Griffin accessed one of Caleb's dormant trust accounts. It was in both our names. He liquidated it. Dr. Rowe didn't flinch. How do you feel? Eleanor breathed in, long and slow. Grateful. Celia tilted her head. For what? For not answering that call the first time. For giving myself time to remember who I am now. The walls of the law office were lined with mahogany shelves and certificates in elegant serif fonts, but Eleanor felt none of their stability. The paper in her hands trembled slightly. It wasn't the cold. It wasn't even anger. It was the slow, suffocating ache of recognition, an old bruise being pressed. Across the desk, Harold Klein, her longtime estate attorney, cleared his throat. He didn't look her in the eye. I had the financials reviewed, Eleanor. Twice, to be sure. She nodded, silent. He accessed the dormant trust fund 4 months ago, transferred the entirety into a private LLC account in Los Angeles. He listed himself as the sole managing partner. And forged my signature, she asked. Harold hesitated. It's close. Too close to be coincidence. Eleanor looked down at the document. Her name, her handwriting, but not her hand, not her consent. The ink blurred slightly as her tears touched the paper. She didn't sob, just blinked once. The weight of it collected quietly like fog on glass. You told me the accounts were sealed. They were, he said, but the power of attorney Caleb left behind, Griffin never destroyed it, and it gave him just enough leeway to exploit a technical gap. I'm sorry. Sorry. A word that did nothing to stop the slow freefall of grief that followed betrayal. She stood, brushing the crease of her slacks with shaking hands. Send me copies of everything. I'll handle it from here. Outside, the wind was cutting, slicing through her coat like it knew how brittle she'd become. She drove home on instinct, eyes straight, breath shallow, as the town passed by in muted shades of November. Margot was already waiting on the porch, arms crossed over her chest, eyes knowing. You look like someone poured you out and forgot to refill. Eleanor handed her the manila folder. He forged my signature, emptied the trust. Margot exhaled, low and long. You wanted a son. He wanted a safety net. They sat together in silence, the way women often do when words are too small for the wound. Inside, Eleanor placed the documents on her kitchen table, staring at them as if they might reshape themselves into something forgivable. She poured a glass of water, sat down, took out her journal. Was I raising him? Or surviving beside him? That line hit harder than she expected. The truth was, she hadn't been a mother in the way she'd once hoped. Not really. She'd been a buffer, a caretaker, a shadow between Caleb and chaos. And Griffin, he hadn't seen her, not as a person, not as a parent. She had been a resource, a backdrop, a body that made lunch, signed forms, gave rides, said little. She thought of every time she'd defended him, to friends, to teachers, to herself, of every silence she'd swallowed so he could have a louder voice, of every time she'd told herself, he'll grow out of this. And now, here they were. The ink from the forged signature felt like a final sentence in a long, unspoken book. She opened her laptop. A blank document stared back. She typed slowly, methodically. Subject: cease and desist misuse of trust fund assets. The legal language was cold by necessity, but between the lines, her grief bled through. She wrote it not out of vengeance, but preservation. Because if she didn't draw this line, she knew she'd never stop bleeding from the ones he'd already crossed. The next morning, Eleanor stood at the post office counter, envelope in hand, her name clean and deliberate on the return label. The woman behind the glass took it without a word. As she stepped outside, the morning sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. Not warm, but honest. She stood there a moment, hands in her coat pockets, the wind tugging gently at her hair. There was no peace. Not yet. But there was something close to clarity. And that was enough. For now. The letter started with her name. His name, really, but in her voice. Griffin, then nothing. Just the sound of the pen pausing, the clock ticking on the wall, and the quiet hum of Eleanor's breath trying to find the right shape to form her pain. She sat at the old desk by the window, a place once used for budgeting grocery lists and writing holiday cards, now serving as the confession booth for a mother trying to reclaim her voice. The words came slowly at first, then in a rush. You were born angry. I think I knew it even then. When the nurses handed you to me and you screamed as if you already knew what the world would do to us. And I held you tighter because I thought love could unteach that. I thought I could raise you into softness. But you learned his silence before you ever heard my lullabies. Her pen moved without hesitation now. The words weren't elegant. They didn't need to be. They needed to be real. You mirrored him so well, Griffin. The sighs, the way you rolled your eyes when I spoke, the careful way you learned to dismiss me without raising your voice. You were still a boy when you made me feel invisible. And I kept loving you anyway. Tears slipped down her cheeks, unceremonious, unchecked. She didn't wipe them away. I let you take from me because I believed that was the shape of motherhood. Silent, sacrificial. I let you call me names. I let you go. I let you come back. I let you steal again, but this is the last time I let you rewrite the story without me in it. When she finally stopped writing, 6 pages later, the sun had dropped behind the ridge, casting long golden streaks across the desk. The house smelled faintly of the lavender oil she'd dabbed on the corners of her pillow last night, trying to sleep. Eleanor read the letter once more, hands steady now. Then she tore it in half, then in quarters, and finally into strips. She didn't cry again. She felt hollowed out but not broken, like something had been excavated, something she'd been carrying for too long. She gathered the pieces, held them a moment, then moved to the kitchen. The stovetop burner flared to life, a small blue flame. She fed the strips into it one by one, watching them curl into ash. She placed the cooled remnants into a small glass jar she kept on the windowsill, a jar that once held sea glass, now filled with the ashes of words she could never say aloud. A quiet voice rose in her chest, not spoken, not meant for anyone else to hear. I never stopped loving him, but I also never stopped bleeding. That night, the wind howled stronger than usual. She pulled a blanket over her lap and sat by the fire, eyes drifting close to the crackle of old wood giving way to flame. At dawn, something thudded against the porch. She opened the door cautiously, robe drawn tight. There, on the steps, sat a plain cardboard box. No name, no label, just I waiting. She brought it inside, heart thudding, not with dread, but something stranger, something that felt like the breath before a memory. She opened the box. Inside were letters, dozens, some yellowed at the edges, some torn, others written on hotel stationery, bar napkins, legal pads, school flyers, all in the same script. Some yellowed at the edges, some torn, others written on hotel stationery, bar napkins, legal pads, school flyers, all in the same script. Griffin's. She pulled one from the middle. It was dated 3 years ago. Mom, I don't know why I'm writing this if I never send them. Maybe because it's the only way I still feel connected to you. I keep hearing your voice even though I haven't earned it. Another, older. I miss the way you used to touch my hair when I couldn't sleep. I hated it then. I think I needed it more than I knew. She didn't read them all, not yet, but she closed the box with care and set it on the table, placing her small jar of ashes beside it. 2 lives, 2 versions of the truth. She had burned her voice into silence, and he had buried his in ink. Perhaps now they were ready to be heard. The earth was soft under her fingers, darker than she remembered, damp from last night's rain. Eleanor knelt at the edge of her yard, an oak sapling beside her, its roots wrapped in burlap and patience. She pressed her hand into the soil, steadying the small tree as she dug, each movement methodical, unhurried. Spring had just begun to show itself, early crocuses curling up from the ground, robins fussing in the branches above. But Eleanor's hands worked like someone making peace with something deeper than seasons. The sapling was only 4 feet tall, thin and fragile, but she knew its strength wasn't in what it showed above ground. It was in the roots it hadn't yet grown. As she worked, memory crept in, Not in flashes, but as a slow, steady return, the kind that carried a different kind of ache. Griffin had been 10 the first time she left Caleb. It had taken her months to find the courage. Years, really. Years of small humiliations, of disappearing into herself, of pretending Caleb's bitterness was just stress, just bad moods, just a rough patch. But she had packed their bags one afternoon in early June. Griffin was home from school, watching cartoons on the floor, legs crossed, oblivious to the decision being made just one room over. They stayed in a small motel near the state line, the kind with buzzing lights and a vending machine that spat out flat soda. Griffin cried the first night, then the second. On the third, he stopped eating. "I want to go home," he whispered. Eleanor had knelt beside him, brushing the hair from his face. "This is home now, sweetheart." "No, it's not," he said. "It doesn't smell like anything. Home smells like Dad's coffee." She'd held him as he cried, and something in her cracked. By the end of the week, she was calling Caleb. By the end of the month, she was back in the house she'd escaped from, her suitcase still half-packed. She hadn't left again, not until he was grown. And even then, it hadn't been her who closed the door. Eleanor set the sapling into the hole, surrounding it with soil, patting it down gently. Her fingers were lined with dirt, but the motion calmed her, anchored her. "I chose his comfort over my sanity," she said aloud, though no one was near enough to hear. Not just Griffin's, Caleb's too. The entire house had been built around male convenience, her silence, her sacrifice, her smiles worn like armor. She finished planting, stepping back to look at the little oak now standing where a dying rosebush had once struggled. It looked almost defiant, like it knew how long it would take to become something unshakable. Inside, the light had shifted with the hour. Eleanor stood at her kitchen sink, washing the dirt from her hands, her gaze moving across the backyard where the oak now stood like a promise. She turned toward the living room, where the box of Griffin's unsent letters still waited on the coffee table. She hadn't opened more of them. Not yet. Not until she knew what she would do with what they might contain. Instead, she opened a side cabinet, pulled out a dust-covered easel. It creaked when she unfolded it, but held. Next came the paints, old but still viable, and a set of brushes she hadn't touched in years. They smelled faintly of turpentine and time. She sat up near the front window, where the afternoon light fell in soft stripes. She painted slowly at first, shapes, colors, movement without pressure. It didn't have to be good. It only had to be hers. Later, she found her guitar, strings slightly out of tune but otherwise intact. She tuned it by ear, fingers remembering positions long dormant. The music wasn't perfect, but the room listened. Margot stopped by just before dinner, bringing a mason jar of her pickled green beans and an eyebrow raised in curiosity. "You're glowing," she said as she stepped inside. "That terrifies me." Eleanor chuckled, setting down the brush she'd been holding. "I've been planting." "Metaphorically?" "Literally, and maybe a little of both." Margot walked through the living room, eyeing the canvas with polite skepticism. "So this is what rebirth looks like, slightly abstract, very green." "It's a start," Eleanor said. They sat in the kitchen, the warm scent of rosemary bread rising between them. Margot took a sip of her tea, then asked, "Do you feel any different? Since the box?" Eleanor nodded. "I don't know what I'll do with those letters, but they don't scare me." "Because you're stronger now?" "Because I finally feel like someone who matters, even just to myself." Margot smiled. "Took you long enough." Eleanor laughed, quiet and real. Later, after Margot left, Eleanor stepped onto her porch and looked out toward the little oak sapling. It stood still in the dusk, the wind brushing gently through its sparse leaves. She whispered to it like a secret. "You don't have to grow fast. Just grow true." Then she turned off the porch light and walked inside, leaving the night to cradle the tree and herself in peace. The rain came fast, sheets of it pounding the porch roof, rattling the gutters, soaking the earth in minutes. Eleanor had just closed the windows when she heard the knock. It wasn't tentative, but it wasn't demanding either. She opened the door slowly, half expecting the storm to be playing tricks. Griffin stood on the steps, drenched, Water streaked down his face, flattening his hair, dripping from the edge of his coat. He looked older than she remembered, not just tired, but surrendered. He didn't speak right away, neither did she. Finally he said, "I didn't bring an umbrella." She stepped aside. "I can see that." He walked in slowly, water pooling at his feet. She handed him a towel without speaking. He dried his face, then his hands gripping the cloth as if it were the only thing tethering him. "I wasn't sure you'd answer." "I wasn't either." He sat in the chair by the fireplace, the one she usually claimed. She didn't correct him. She sat across from him, arms folded, waiting. "I was cruel," he began, "because I didn't know how to need you without hating myself for it." Eleanor inhaled slowly, steadying the storm inside her. "That's not mine to fix." Griffin nodded, the towel twisted in his hands. "I thought if I pushed you away, I'd be free. From him, from everything he made me feel. But I wasn't. I just replaced his voice with my own." They sat in silence for a long time. The fire popped behind them, casting slow shadows along the walls. "I read your letter," Eleanor said finally. His head snapped up. "The one behind the photo," she clarified. "The one you never gave me." He blinked. "I didn't think you'd ever see it." "It was buried so deep I almost didn't." He rubbed his hands over his knees. "I don't remember writing most of those." They were still true. They talked for hours, cautiously, like people walking across ice. Griffin confessed his shame, the spiral of his business failure, the nights spent blaming her, then himself, then her again. Eleanor listened. She didn't absolve, but she didn't retreat either. "I didn't come here expecting forgiveness," he said. "Good," she replied, "because I'm still figuring out what that means. But I came because I wanted to stop pretending." She looked at him carefully. "Pretending what?" "That you didn't matter to me." She closed her eyes just for a moment. "You don't get to say that yet," she said gently, "not without showing me first." He nodded. Outside, the rain slowed. Griffin leaned forward, elbows on knees, hesitating. "There's something else," he said. "Something I haven't told you." Eleanor stiffened. "Go on." "I have a daughter." Silence. "She's 6. Her name's Nora. Her mom and I, it didn't last. But Nora, she's everything." Eleanor said nothing, her breath caught between disbelief and something dangerously close to hope. "She knows about you. She asks why she doesn't have a grandma like the other kids at school." He pulled a small photograph from his wallet, creased, clearly cherished, and handed it to her. The little girl in the photo had Griffin's eyes but a rounder face, cheeks full of mischief and wonder. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, a gap-toothed grin taking up half her face. "She wants to meet you," Griffin said. Eleanor stared at the photo for a long time, her thumb brushing the corner. "She deserves to know where she comes from," he added quietly. "The good parts, not just what I ran from." Eleanor placed the photo on the table between them. The fire behind them had dimmed to embers. "I won't make promises I can't keep," she said. "I'm not asking you to," Griffin replied. "But I will be honest," she said, "from here on out." He nodded, his eyes soft with something between regret and relief. They sat in the dark, not quite mother and son, not yet reconciled, but finally facing each other without armor. And in the quiet, Eleanor wondered what kind of world a little girl named Nora had grown up in, and what it might mean to be a grandmother after all. Eleanor didn't sleep the night before. She lay awake listening to the slow creaks of the house, the whisper of wind moving through the trees, and the occasional call of a nightbird. Her heart ticked louder than the clock, her mind a restless carousel of what-ifs and half-imagined scenarios. She changed her outfit 3 times the next morning, settled on a soft gray sweater, and made tea she forgot to drink. The house was clean, not perfectly so, but intentionally warm. Candles lit on the mantel, her favorite throw folded neatly on the couch, the smell of cinnamon and rosemary floating from the kitchen. She stood at the window when the car pulled into the drive. Griffin stepped out first, wearing jeans and a navy button-down, his usual tension muted behind his eyes. He opened the back door and then, Nora. She tumbled out in a flurry of untied sneakers and pink raincoat, though the sky was clear. Her curls were wild, her cheeks flushed from excitement, not nerves. Eleanor opened the front door before they could knock. Nora stared up at her, wide-eyed, a child's instinctive curiosity taking in everything. "Hi," the girl said. "Are you the grandma?" Eleanor's breath caught in her chest. "I guess I am," she said, voice trembling just enough. Nora stepped inside without hesitation, spinning once in the living room. "It smells like love here," she said. The words hit like a hymn. Griffin looked up, his expression unreadable. But his eyes, damp with something he didn't wipe away, followed his daughter like she was the only map that mattered. They walked out to the garden after tea. Eleanor had laid it out years ago, raised beds of lavender, wild mint, and thyme, a stone path leading through clusters of snapdragons and bleeding hearts. The oak sapling, still young but holding its ground, stood watch at the edge. Nora moved through it like a bee finding home. "What's this one?" she asked, crouching by the rosemary bush. "That's rosemary," Eleanor said, "for remembering." "Remembering what?" Eleanor smiled gently. "Everything that matters." Nora nodded solemnly, as if storing that answer in a place she'd return to later. Griffin stayed behind, hands in his pockets, letting the space fill in between them. "You did all this?" he asked softly, almost to himself. "Yes," Eleanor said, "a little at a time. It's beautiful." Eleanor didn't respond right away. She watched Nora pluck a fallen petal and cradle it in her palm. "It's healing," she said at last. "That's better than beautiful." Griffin stepped closer, eyes on his daughter. "She's soft in a way I never was." "She's hers," Eleanor said. "Not yours, not mine. Let her stay that way." He nodded, and for once didn't try to defend, didn't deflect, just stood there, a man trying to listen instead of speak. Later, inside, Nora drew a picture at the kitchen table, 3 figures stick-thin, smiling under a tree. "That's us," she said, pointing. "Me, Dad, and you." Eleanor's throat tightened, but she nodded. "Can I come back?" Nora asked. Eleanor glanced at Griffin, then back at the girl. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." After they left, the house felt quieter, but not empty. Eleanor sat by the window, holding Nora's drawing in her lap, tracing the lines with her finger. She didn't feel fixed, she didn't feel forgiven, but she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Hope, not the blinding kind, not the kind that demanded something in return, just enough to begin again, and for now that was more than enough. The shore was nearly empty, just a few gulls riding the breeze and the sound of waves brushing the sand like a heartbeat. Eleanor walked slowly, boots pressing soft impressions into the wet ground. The air was brisk, salted, and alive with memory, but no longer heavy with it. She had made this walk so many times over the years, sometimes to think, sometimes to forget. But this morning was different. This morning she walked without needing answers. She paused near the waterline, letting the surf kiss the tips of her boots, the cold pricking her skin in quiet acknowledgement. Her coat whipped gently around her legs, hair silvering in the wind. Her voice moved through her thoughts, not spoken aloud but clear, her own voice, finally belonging to no one but herself. Silence was my scream. It became my sanctuary. There had been power in not calling Griffin back that first time. Power in not rushing to fix what she didn't break, in not mothering the wound until it demanded more blood. And now, months later, the silence had changed shape. It was no longer a wall. It was a boundary, a space she chose to protect, not a prison she'd been placed in. Her relationship with Griffin had settled into something real, if not fully restored. They spoke occasionally, a call every few weeks, a shared holiday. He no longer asked her to pretend the past didn't happen, and she no longer tried to force him to remember it the way she did. Their conversations were careful, like walking paths after a rain. But they were honest, that was enough. She still had the box of his unsent letters. She hadn't finished reading them. Some days she wasn't sure she ever would. Some things didn't need to be unearthed to be understood. But with Nora, there was no caution. There was only joy. The little girl filled Eleanor's home with the sound of unfiltered laughter, the scatter of crayons, the occasional spilled juice, and questions that had no answers. Why do worms come out when it rains? Does the oak tree know we're watching it grow? Can love smell like cookies? Yes, Eleanor had said once, smiling into her teacup. Yes, it can. She gave Nora something she hadn't been able to give Griffin, herself, unafraid. Not a version softened for survival. Not a mother stuck in the shape others demanded. Just a woman with stories and songs and enough love to hold a child without losing herself in the process. Back home, the light filtered gently through the front windows. The house was quiet, not because it was empty, but because it was settled. Eleanor sat at her desk with a blank page in front of her. Not a journal, not something meant for memory. A letter, but this one wasn't to Griffin, and not to Nora. It was to herself. She wrote slowly, savoring the feel of pen on paper, the shape of her own name. Dear Eleanor, you waited too long to believe you were worthy of peace, but you found it anyway. You stopped bleeding for people who never looked for bandages. You spoke when silence would have been safer. You built a garden out of ruin. You learned that motherhood isn't martyrdom. And you've grown, not back into the woman you were before, but into someone new, someone stronger. You will always carry the grief, but now you carry it with grace, and that's enough. She folded the letter, tucked it into a clean envelope, and placed it in the jar with the ashes of the first one she'd burned. A new beginning alongside the remnants of an old release. Eleanor stepped outside just as the sun broke through the clouds. The oak sapling stood a little taller, branches trembling slightly in the wind. She smiled, not because the past had healed, but because she had learned how to live beside it. And in that silence, the one she had chosen, not inherited, there was finally space enough to breathe. Every family has its secrets, some just cut deeper than blood. If this story stirred something you've never said out loud, you're exactly where you need to be. Stick around. What's coming next might just feel like it was written for you. Because healing isn't quiet, and neither are the stories we're about to tell.